There is a silence that comes after the world ends. It's not an empty silence, but a heavy one, filled with the ghosts of laughter that once was, and the echo of a future that will never be. It is in that silence that the deepest secrets are born. Secrets you cradle close, not out of malice, but as a desperate act of preservation. To protect the one, fragile, beautiful thing you have left from the storm that took everything else. My name, is Eleanor. And the story I have to tell is about the secret I kept, the life I hid from the man who was once my family, and the love that grew in the shadows of a broken heart. The first sign was a sudden, violent aversion to the smell of brewing coffee, the very aroma that had been the anchor of her mornings for 15 years. Eleanor stood in her pristine, silent kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped the counter, the rich scent suddenly morphing into something foul, metallic. She dismissed it as stress. Everything could be dismissed as stress in the cataclysmic aftermath of a divorce. The split from David had not been a clean break. It had been a demolition. A 15-year marriage, a carefully constructed life of shared friends, intertwined finances, and quiet, comfortable routines, had been reduced to rubble by a single, stark confession. He'd fallen in love with a junior partner at his firm, a woman with a laugh like wind chimes and a wardrobe that didn't include a single item purchased on sale. He told Eleanor over a dinner she had spent 3 hours preparing, his words clinical, as if he were delivering a disappointing quarterly report. "I'm not happy, Ellie. I haven't been for a long time. I need to pursue a different path." The ensuing months were a blur of legal documents, the division of assets that felt like the dissection of a corpse, and the hollow echo of her footsteps in the half-empty house she'd fought to keep. The house was a mausoleum of her former life, every room a testament to a future that had been cancelled. It was in this state of profound grief, a feeling so heavy it had its own gravity, that she missed a period. Then another. The positive test, a cheap plastic stick bought at a pharmacy 20 miles from home, felt less like a revelation and more like a sentence. She sat on the cold bathroom tiles, the linoleum imprinting a pattern on her bare thighs, and stared at the 2 pink lines. A wild, desperate joy tried to bloom in her chest, a biological imperative of hope, but it was instantly strangled by a cold, sharp fear. David's child. Conceived in one of their last, desperate attempts to fix what was. Broken, an act that had felt more like a funeral rite than an act of love. She told no one. The news felt like a secret weapon, one that could be used against her. David, with his new, unencumbered life, his wind chime woman. What would he do? Would he see it as a chain, an obligation to be managed? Would he fight her for it, not out of desire, but out of a cold sense of paternal duty that would involve lawyers and custody schedules? Or worse, would he look at her with pity, offer financial support with the detached air of a charity donor? The thought was more humiliating than his leaving. So, she hid it. The pregnancy became her clandestine operation, a secret war waged within the borders of her own body. She became a master of deception. Loose, flowing tunics and strategic layering became her uniform. She declined invitations with excuses that were variations on a theme of debilitating migraines and a need for solitude to heal. Her friends, initially a flurry of concerned calls and casseroles, eventually retreated, accepting her narrative of being the tragically broken-hearted divorcee who needed space. Her body, however, was a traitorous collaborator. The morning sickness was a relentless tide she had to quietly ride out in the sterile silence of her home or in the locked single-occupancy restroom at the small library where she worked part-time. The first flutter, a sensation like a trapped moth beating its wings against the walls of a lantern, sent her into a panic. It was too real, too separate from her. She would lie in her empty bed at night, her hands resting on the growing, taut curve of her stomach, feeling the alien movements within, and a love so fierce and terrifying would well up in her that it would choke her. It was a love laced with guilt, a love she felt she had to protect by keeping it a secret from its own father. She named the baby Sam. A safe, neutral name. The first sign was a sudden, violent aversion to the smell of brewing coffee, the very aroma that had been the anchor of her mornings for 15 years. Eleanor stood in her pristine, silent kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped the counter, the rich scent suddenly morphing into something foul, metallic. She dismissed it as stress. Everything could be dismissed as stress in the cataclysmic aftermath of a divorce. The split from David had not been a clean break. It had been a demolition. A 15-year marriage, a carefully constructed life of shared friends, intertwined finances, and quiet, comfortable routines, had been reduced to rubble by a single, stark confession. He'd fallen in love with a junior partner at his firm, a woman with a laugh like wind chimes and a wardrobe that didn't include a single item purchased on sale. He told Eleanor over a dinner she had spent 3 hours preparing, his words clinical, as if he were delivering a disappointing quarterly report. "I'm not happy, Ellie. I haven't been for a long time. I need to pursue a different path." The ensuing months were a blur of legal documents, the division of assets that felt like the dissection of a corpse, and the hollow echo of her footsteps in the half-empty house she'd fought to keep. The house was a mausoleum of her former life, every room a testament to a future that had been cancelled. It was in this state of profound grief, a feeling so heavy it had its own gravity, that she missed a period. Then another. The positive test, a cheap plastic stick bought at a pharmacy 20 miles from home, felt less like a revelation and more like a sentence. She sat on the cold bathroom tiles, the linoleum imprinting a pattern on her bare thighs, and stared at the 2 pink lines. A wild, desperate joy tried to bloom in her chest, a biological imperative of hope, but it was instantly strangled by a cold, sharp fear. David's child. Conceived in one of their last, desperate attempts to fix what was. She would talk to Sam in the quiet hours, her voice a whisper in the dark. "I'm sorry," she would say. "I'm so sorry this is how it starts. But it's you and me, my love. Just you and me against the world. I will love you enough for 2. I will love you enough for 1,000. Her world shrank to the confines of her house and her own internal landscape. She devoured books on prenatal health, her secret research conducted late at night, the glow of the laptop the only light in her living room. She ate meticulously, swallowed her vitamins with gulps of water that tasted like fear, and walked for hours in the secluded woods behind her property, her movements slow and deliberate. She was a vessel, a ark carrying a single, precious passenger through a deluge of her own making. David called once, 2 months after the divorce was finalized. His voice on the phone was unfamiliar, strained with a performative concern. "Just checking in, Ellie. Making sure you're okay." She was standing in the kitchen, 7 months pregnant, her body a monument to the life he had left behind. She could feel Sam turning, a slow, heavy roll. She pictured David in his new minimalist apartment, the one with the view of the city, the one that held no history, no memories of her. "I'm fine, David," as she said, her voice miraculously steady, a flat calm over a roiling sea. "Just getting on with things." "Good. That's good." A pause. "Liarner says hello." Liarner, the wind chime woman. The name was a shard of glass in her heart. "Give her my best," Eleanor lied, the words ash in her mouth. She hung up and slid down the kitchen cabinet to the floor, great, silent sobs racking her frame. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent jab, as if in protest. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, a human shield. "I know, my love," as she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I know. He doesn't get to know you. Not yet. You are mine." The due date crept closer, a storm on the horizon. She prepared alone. A bassinet, disassembled and hidden in the back of her closet. A box of diapers, tucked under a blanket in the trunk of her car. A single, soft, yellow sleepsuit, washed and folded with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. She packed a hospital bag and hid it under her bed, a secret mission kit. Labor began on a Tuesday, in the deep, silent heart of a rainy night. It started as a low ache in her back, a tightening that she initially mistook for another of pregnancy's countless discomforts. But the pains came again, rhythmic and undeniable, each one a wave of reality crashing over her carefully constructed fortress of solitude. There was no one to call. No husband to rouse with a panicked whisper, no mother to offer soothing words. There was only the relentless, primal progress of her body and the drumming of the rain against the windows. She timed the contractions on her phone, her breath hitching, the screen's blue light illuminating her face, pale and beaded with sweat. When they were 5 minutes apart, she called a taxi, giving a false name. The ride to the hospital was a surreal, pain-racked journey through a sleeping city. The driver, a man with tired eyes, glanced in the rearview mirror. "You okay, miss?" "Fine," as she gasped, as another contraction seized her, her fingers digging into the worn upholstery. "Just or fine." The admissions process was a blur of paperwork and perfunctory questions. "Emergency contact?" the nurse asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. "There isn't one," Eleanor said, her voice thin. "Partner? Husband?" "No." The nurse looked up, her expression a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "Okay, honey. We'll take good care of you." They put her in a delivery room that was too bright, too sterile. The pain was a living thing, a beast trying to tear its way out of her. She rode the waves of it alone, her nails biting into the plastic rails of the bed, her cries swallowed by the impersonal walls. A kind, older nurse with gentle hands stayed with her, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. "You're doing so well, Eleanor. Just breathe. Your baby will be here soon." In the peak of a particularly violent contraction, a thought, clear and desperate, cut through the agony. David should be here. He should see this. He should know what he's missing. But the thought was washed away by the next tidal wave of pain, leaving only a residue of bitter loneliness. And then, with a final, gut-wrenching push that felt like her soul was being ripped in two, it was over. A sharp, indignant cry pierced the air. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing a squirming, vernix-smeared creature on her chest. He was red and wrinkled, his face a tiny, furious knot. A thatch of dark hair, David's hair. He rooted against her skin, his mouth a perfect, seeking rosebud. And in that moment, every moment of fear, every lonely night, every deceit, evaporated. A love so pure, so absolute, flooded her that she felt incandescent with it. It was a cataclysm of the heart. "Hello, Sam," as she breathed, her tears falling onto his warm, damp head. "Hello, my love." The 3 days in the hospital were a strange, liminal space. A cocoon of beeping machines and hushed voices. Other rooms had balloons, flowers, rotating casts of joyful visitors. Her room was silent but for Sam's soft snuffles and her own whispered words. She learned his rhythms, the way he curled his hand around her finger, the specific pitch of his hungry cry. She was exhausted, her body a landscape of ache and wonder, but she was fiercely, terrifyingly happy. They discharged her on a Friday. She dressed Sam in the yellow sleepsuit, her hands trembling. She signed the papers, accepted the stack of pamphlets on postpartum care, and walked out of the hospital alone, a new mother carrying her son in a car seat that felt impossibly heavy. The house welcomed them with its familiar silence, but it was a different silence now. It was no longer empty, it was full of Sam. She set up the bassinet in her bedroom. The act of assembling it, of fitting the sheets, felt like a sacred rite. She was building a world for two. The first weeks were a brutal, beautiful marathon of survival. The sleep deprivation was a form of torture. Her body was a foreign country, racked with aches and leaking milk. Sam cried for reasons she couldn't decipher, his tiny body a vessel of immense, unknowable needs. There were moments of sheer panic, sitting on the floor at 3 a.m., sobbing along with him, convinced she was failing, that she was not enough. But there were also the moments of sublime grace. The way he would sigh in his sleep, a sound of perfect contentment. The way his eyes, slowly focusing, would lock onto hers with a startling intensity. The feeling of his small, warm weight sleeping on her chest, his heartbeat a tiny, frantic drum against her own. In those moments, the world outside, the world of David and Liarna and the life that was, ceased to exist. She managed to keep the secret for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of no social media posts, of turning away well-meaning neighbors at the door with a cough and a claim of the flu, of having groceries delivered. She was a ghost in her own life, a keeper of a magnificent secret. The end came, as it inevitably had to, with a misplaced bill. A piece of mail from the hospital, detailing the final charges for the delivery, was mistakenly sent to David's old address, which still had some of his mail forwarded. He called her, his voice tight with confusion. "Eleanor, I got a bill from St. Jude's. For a delivery? It's got your name on it. Is this some kind of mistake?" Her blood ran cold. She was holding Sam, who was nursing, his small hand splayed against her breast. She looked down at his perfect profile, at the sweep of his lashes against his cheek, and knew the fortress walls had been breached. "It's not a mistake," Ishi said quietly. There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the calculations, the dawning, horrifying comprehension. "Eleanor," his voice was a whisper. Did you have a baby?" "Yes." Another silence, this one heavier, charged with a storm of unspoken questions. "Is it mine?" The question, so blunt, so clinical, felt like a physical blow. "Yes," Ishi said again, her voice barely audible. "My God." The words were exhaled, a rush of shock and something else. Anger, maybe, or betrayal. "When? Why didn't you tell me?" And then the dam broke. All the fear, the loneliness, the righteous anger, the months of carrying the weight alone, came pouring out. "Tell you?" Her voice shook with a decade and a half of suppressed emotion. "So you could what, David? So you could feel obligated? So you and Liarna could discuss me as a complication in your new, perfect life? So you could send a check and feel like you'd done your duty? This wasn't about you. This was about us. Me and him. I did what I had to do to protect him. To protect us." She hung up, her entire body trembling. Sam, disturbed by the tension, pulled away and began to fuss. She held him close, rocking back and forth, her tears falling into his hair. "It's okay, my love," as she chanted, a desperate mantra. "It's okay. Mommy's here." He came over an hour later. She saw his car pull into the driveway, and her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't answer the door at first. He knocked, softly at first, then more insistently. "Eleanor, please. Open the door. We need to talk." She opened it a crack, the chain lock still on. He looked older. The clean-shaven, confident man she'd last seen in a lawyer's office was gone. He was pale, his eyes haunted. "Let me in, Ellie. Please." She unchained the door and stepped back. He walked in, his eyes scanning the living room, taking in the bassinet, the burp cloths on the sofa, the subtle but undeniable evidence of a newborn. His gaze finally landed on her, on the baby in her arms. Can I see him?" he asked, his voice rough. She hesitated, every instinct screaming to hold some closer, to shield him. But she slowly, reluctantly, turned so he could see the baby's face. David stared. She watched his expression shift from shock to a bewildered, aching wonder. He took a half-step closer, his hand rising slightly, as if to touch, then falling back to his side. "He has my hair," he said, his voice cracking. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. They stood in silence for a long moment, the air thick with the ghosts of their past and the overwhelming presence of this new future. "Why, Eleanor?" he asked again, but the anger was gone, replaced by a profound, gut-wrenching confusion. "How could you keep this from me?" She looked at him, this man who had been her husband, the architect of her greatest happiness and a most profound sorrow, and she told him the truth. It wasn't shouted, or hissed. It was simply stated, a flat, weary truth that had been carved into her bones over 9 long months. "Because after you left, the only thing I had left was the hope of him. And that hope felt so fragile, David. It felt like a single, flickering candle in a hurricane. And I was so afraid that your reality, your new life, would be the wind that blew it out. I hid him because I was building a world where he could be loved without condition, without complication. A world where his beginning wouldn't be a footnote in someone else's story of escape." David sank onto the arm of the sofa, his head in his hands. He was crying, silent, shaking sobs. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had just realized the true, irrevocable cost of the path he had chosen. "I missed it," he choked out. "I missed all of it." Eleanor looked down at Sam, who had fallen asleep, his breath soft and even against her neck. He was here. He was real. The secret was out, and the world had not ended. It had just become infinitely more complicated. "Yes," she said, her voice heavy with a sorrow that was too deep for tears. "You did." She stood there, a mother holding her son, the ex-husband weeping at her feet. The silence in their room was no longer empty, nor was it peaceful. It was the sound of a new, painful story beginning, a story written in the deep, sad words of a love that was both a sanctuary and a prison, a story that started with a secret, and would now have to find its way, one painful, uncertain step at a time, into the light.